Have you struggled with OCD and insomnia and you've wondered how to leave these struggles? Or have you wondered why there are so many similarities between them? Or have you wondered if people who have OCD insomnia are somehow different from people who don't? Shahar, a member of our community, has had all these questions. And in this episode of Minding the Comments, we're going to go through them one by one to see how you can find yourself where you want to be, free of the OCD struggle, free of insomnia, and a place of peaceful sleep and peace of mind. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm a sleep physician turned sleep coach and online educator. And in this episode of Minding the Comments, we're going to look through a comment from Shahar, and I think we can learn a lot from it that will really help, especially if you've struggled both with OCD and insomnia. And by the way, hope you had a really nice Thanksgiving if you're celebrating. It was nice and peaceful on my end. My parents actually came over from Sweden, and they didn't even know it's Thanksgiving. They had just found some nice tickets and decided to come over, and it was super nice to have them here. But yes, let's get into this episode and specifically the comment that inspired it. And it is from a recent video where the thumbnail says what 3 years of sleep data taught Melissa about recovery. That's actually not the exact thumbnail. I have a hard time reading it. It says what 3 years of hard sleep data reveals is the exact thumbnail. So yes, it's a comment on that video. And here it is. Hi, Daniel. How are you? Very well. Thanks for asking, Shahar. Can you please tell why a person develops OCD or insomnia? Is the brain of OCD sufferers different from non-OCD people in some way? And most importantly, is OCD genetic? Because I heard it in some video. I hope the answer is no to all these questions. Also, is OCD a disease that will be there for our whole life? It will just change themes sometimes. Sometimes it will be sleep, sometimes relationships. Are we somehow different from other people? If not, then why do we only catastrophize these harmless things which nobody else fears? Why only we develop fears around such small things all the time? Why are we so different? I hope you'll answer each and every question deeply. I request you, and I'm sure many of us have such doubts. I'm thankful you asked these questions, Shahar, because I think, again, many in our community will have similar ones. And so let's get into it. I wrote them down here so we can answer them one by one. And the first one was, can you please tell why a person develops OCD or insomnia? I think this is like the perfect place to start, the foundational understanding of what is OCD in our worldview, in the NATO world, what is insomnia in our worldview, how do we see that struggle? I think definitely the most common way insomnia starts is that there is some type of stress in our lives. And this leads to what I call the threatened state of the mind. And this can be anything happening. This can be like we're going to move, or we become a parent, or we lose our job. Something like that puts our mind in the threatened state. Something is happening that the brain knows, like, okay, we've got to be on high alert here. Something's going on. We've got to be prepared, right? And this very often leads to us sleeping less. And just looking at this, there's some type of stress, puts our mind in the threatened state, and we're sleeping less. So far, all we see here is just like typical, normal, habitual, human experiences, right? And all this is functional. The threatened state is there so that we solve the problem. We sleep less for the kind of same reason, so we can problem solve, or just generally, like when something is like threatening to us, we sleep less, so we are aware, so we don't become, so we aren't as vulnerable, right? Now, this isn't insomnia. This is just us having some disrupted sleep because of some stress. So how does actually insomnia develop? Well, it starts the same way. There's some stress. It puts our mind in that threatened state. We're sleeping less, but then something else happens. In this threatened state, where our mind is actively monitoring for threats, making sure we're safe, it misidentifies sleeping less as a threat. And this is the moment we go like, oh no, I'm not sleeping enough. Why am I sleeping so little? What's going on? This can't be good. That is the moment where sleeping less or being awake at night is tokenized. And now what happens is we have an insomnia cycle, because when we sleep less, that has become a threat, and that puts our mind in the threatened state. And in the threatened state, we sleep less, and sleeping less puts our mind in the threatened state, etc., etc. This is the loop that we call insomnia. And as you can see, it all comes not from stress, not from the mind being in the threatened state, but from that misunderstanding of thinking of sleeping less as a threat. Now, how about OCD? Well, it starts the same way. We have some stress in our lives, our mind goes into the threatened state, and we have worry thoughts. These are thoughts like, what if this happens? Should I do this? How about if that happens? Like this kind of like projecting to the future, catastrophizing. It's actually functional, normal, typical when we are in a stressful situation. And just as this, let's say, disruption to our thoughts or disruption to our sleep, just as these are brought forward by stress, they also self-resolve when that stress is gone, right? So they do not become a cycle in and of itself. Rather, it is the same mechanism that creates this cycle that we call OCD. So we have some stress, our mind goes into the threatened state, we have these worry thoughts, and then we go like, why am I thinking about this all the time? Why do I have these thoughts? Why am I just focusing on one single focus? Why is my mind telling me this? What's going on? And this is the moment where thoughts are tokenized, or specifically like a theme of thoughts, these worry thoughts, those are tokenized. And we start to think of them as a danger in themselves, them as a threat in themselves. And now we have this OCD cycle where we have a worry thought, and that puts our mind in the threatened state. And in the threatened state, we have more worry thoughts, and the worry thoughts put our mind in the threatened state. And this is the cycle that we call insomnia. So this, I think, is really the answer to, can you please tell why a person develops OCD or insomnia? They are two versions of what I call the inner struggle. And they all are like the key reason is this like tokenization, this mislabeling of something that is actually safe and normal and typical and functional as a threat, whether it's not sleeping or worry thoughts. It kind of principally doesn't matter. Like it's the same struggle that comes from this tokenization. Now let's go to the next question from Jahar, which is the brain of OCD sufferers different from non-OCD people in some way? And I would say, to me, like the short answer is no. We are all principally the same. If you take any person on this planet and examine how their liver works, it will work in the principally same way as another person's liver. My liver, or like my adrenals will work the same as my neighbors, right? My thyroid works the same way as my we are all principally the same. So I think the short answer is no. But then, the kind of follow-up question from Char is like, but is OCD genetic? Char said they'd heard that somewhere. And the way I say this is that we are all principally the same, but we are also not identical, right? We all have certain traits, personality, temperament, whatever we want to call it. We know some of our friends and family members are kind of naturally by nature very like easy-go-lucky, easygoing. We have family members who by nature are more, type A, more like a little bit perfectionist, like a hard worker, high achiever, something like that. We all have different traits. And I would say that those of us humans who have traits that are more towards that kind of active, like deep thinker, high achiever, type A person, that person is more likely to perhaps tokenize in the first place, to identify something as a threat, and also to kind of follow through on that, to be like, oh, I have to do something about it. I have to try this. That didn't work. I have to try this. So I think although there are traits that make it more likely for us to have that inner struggle, whether it's OCD or insomnia, it doesn't matter in terms of like leaving the struggle. Like we all, regardless of our temperament, personality, our traits, we can all be struggle-free, right? So I think this explains that if somebody said, oh, OCD is genetic, well, our personality is genetic, our traits are genetic, right? And they can make it more or less likely that we have these versions of the inner struggle, but they don't determine anything. Like regardless of our traits, we can have peace of mind and peaceful sleep. Now, let's go to the next one. Also, is OCD a disease that will be there for our whole life, where it just changes themes sometimes sleep, sometimes relationships? And, we also already talked about how we can be free of this inner struggle regardless of our traits. So no, it's not like a permanent chronic disease. It's just an experience that comes from this tokenization, this mislabeling of something as a threat that isn't a threat. But of course, like we can have the experience of like this kind of thematic experience of the inner struggle, that when our brain is like identifying not sleep as a threat, we have the inner struggle experience we call insomnia, right? When our brain identifies thoughts as a threat, we have the version of the inner struggle we call OCD. When our brain identifies, let's say, anxiety as a threat, we have the version of the inner struggle that we call general anxiety. So yes, we can have this like thematic shift, if you will, but when nothing is tokenized, we don't struggle. When we have seen through this and we see that all these versions of the struggle, they just come from this misunderstanding, mislabeling, then this shifting from one focus to another fades away. And so I think this explains how we can have this kind of shift from one focus to the other, but that doesn't mean anything strange or unusual is happening. It's oftentimes, like, again, a function of the threatened state, that in the threatened state we're actually looking for new threats. So this is nothing strange or unusual at all. And then Shahar said, are we somehow different from other people? And again, we talked about this, that some of us have certain traits, some of us are others, but regardless of our traits, we can be free from the struggle. And then Shahar asked, if not, then why do we only catastrophize these harmless things which nobody else fears? Why do we only develop a fear around such small things all the time? And I would say that we humans, we can develop what I call mental habits. And this is sort of the unconscious habit of starting to think of many things as threats, And it all comes, of course, from a place of like where our brain wants to keep us safe. So it goes like, oh, maybe this is a threat. Maybe we should react to this. Maybe we should try to problem solve this, And then when something else that is really innocent, just another harmless effect of the threatened state. So, for example, palpitations, which we have in threatened states, because we've had this kind of mental habit of tokenizing, of starting to think of things as threats, then that can become a threat too. And this is how we can, because of this mental habit of identifying things as threats, then we can have this life experience of like, oh my gosh, everything is becoming like a big thing for me, a danger, a threat, something I struggle with. But as we talked about before, there's nothing permanent about this. We can develop mental habits, and they can be undeveloped as well. We can start to see not sleeping as a threat, and we can see that there's no threat there. We can start to see thoughts as a threat, and we can start to not see them as a threat anymore. And this is really the key. This is like where I said in the title that the same tools lead us out of insomnia and OCD. This is what I mean, that detokenization, or no longer seeing something as a threat, that is the tool, if you will, or maybe the path. Maybe you should call it the path that leads where we want to be, regardless of what version of the inner struggle we've experienced. And what are the tools? Well, as you can tell from this, the tools are going to be ways that we no longer see something as a threat. And I call this befriending, and it has like 3 levels, if you will. These are kind of like the universal tools, if you will. And the first one is befriending at the first level. And this is just intellectually, logically, cognitively understanding that there is no real threat. When it comes to insomnia, it's like just on a logical level, understanding that not sleeping at night, being awake at night, does not represent danger. It is not a real threat to my health or my well-being. And that can really help. That can be in itself can be life-changing. But oftentimes we can arrive at a place where we intellectually understand this, but we still have these kind of subconscious fears like this. We're still not feeling a big shift, and that's where we want to befriend at the second level, which is the experiential understanding or experiential way of learning. And this is about exposure, in a sense that we want to experience that which we have tried to escape without trying to escape it. So with insomnia, it becomes befriending wakefulness. So being awake at night without trying to stop it, manage it, or control it. And this way we experientially learn that there's actually nothing that is dangerous there. And when it comes to OCD, it becomes about befriending thoughts, having these thoughts that we often call negative, intrusive, but seeing that they're just thoughts and being willing to experience without trying to manage them, control them, or stop them. This is the experiential way of learning. And then thirdly, self-kindness. This is what I think of as befriending, level 3. And it sounds kind of fluffy sometimes and impractical, but just being kind and gentle with ourselves is so incredibly helpful. So often the struggle is maintained by these ideas of like, why am I not there yet? Why can't I get this? Why am I the only one who doesn't understand? Which are just versions of self-criticism. And the more harsh we are on ourselves, the more we maintain the threatened state, and the more likely that we're going to struggle. So being kind and gentle with ourselves, incredibly helpful. And then when we see this, when we understand OCD is the same as insomnia is the same as every other version of the inner struggle, and we can meet this the same way, we find ourselves where we want to be, which is, again, a place of peace of mind and peaceful sleep. Jahar, hope this made a lot of sense to you and everyone else tuning in. I'll see you next time. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you took a ton of value from the video that you just watched. Now, I know that insomnia can be incredibly difficult to navigate, especially if you're a high achiever, a type A person who normally knows exactly how to get things done. This is why I've put together a free course called The Festival of Understanding, which I think is a perfect starting place for you to leave insomnia land. It not only has instruction from me, but it is a live event. So it has questions from the community as well, both which you can learn so much from. If you'd like to join, just head over to our website, thesleepcoachschool.com, and click the link at the very tippy top. And if you join, we'll meet again in the Festival of Understanding.